No Escape After Midnight. The Board of Shadows is a chilling horror story about a group of teenage friends who, in search of a thrill, stumble upon an ancient board game in an abandoned basement. Ignoring mysterious warnings not to play it after midnight, they start the game and soon realize it holds a sinister power. Every move on the board alters reality around them, unleashing horrifying supernatural events. As they confront moving shadows, whispers in the dark, and nightmare visions, they discover they're trapped in a never-ending game, and the only way out is to keep playing, until an unknown ending. In the small town of Millfield, nestled deep in New England, a group of teenage friends, Ethan, Mia, Caleb, and Emma, always sought adrenaline and mystery in abandoned places. Urban legends, ghost stories, and conspiracy theories fueled their sleepless nights and midnight adventure. On a chilly autumn night, the wind howled through the trees, and dry leaves danced in the air as they walked toward their latest challenge, exploring the old Parker Mansion. This house, built in the 19th century, had been abandoned for decades, its immense wooden structure now decaying and cracked. Rumor had it that it was cursed. Those few brave enough to approach it spoke of a presence, something or someone watching from the darkened windows, especially at midnight. "Do you think the stories are true?" Mia asked, her voice low and uncertain as they walked along the path to the mansion. "Nah, I don't buy into that stuff, Mia," replied Ethan, the natural leader of the group, with a confident grin. "People just like to scare each other with stories. It's all just superstition." Caleb, the skeptic, laughed. "Yeah, well, we're about to find out, aren't we?" Emma, the quietest of the group, remained silent, her eyes fixed on the mansion now looming ahead. She was always more sensitive to the energies around her, and something about that house deeply unsettled her. The facade was covered in ivy, and the window panes were shattered, as if something or someone had tried to get in, or out. Pushing open the front door, which creaked loudly, they felt a blast of cold air pass right through them, like the house itself was exhaling a long, eerie sigh of welcome. They descended a creaky wooden staircase, the smell of mold and rotting wood growing stronger. "This is weird," Mia murmured, glancing around. "I didn't expect to find this down here." By the light of their phone flashlights, they saw rows of old shelves, covered in dust and cobwebs, and in the middle of the basement, a massive stone table. On it, an object covered by a cloth. Ethan pulled the cloth away, revealing an intricately carved wooden box adorned with engraved symbols. Curious, Mia stepped closer and brushed off the dust with her jacket sleeve. Engraved on the lid was the name, The Board of Shadows. "A board game? Here?" Mia asked, frowning. "Looks like it," Ethan replied, carefully opening the box. Inside was an old board, carved wooden pieces, a pair of bone dice, and a set of yellowed cards. The instructions were written on an old parchment with faded Gothic letters. Caleb picked up the parchment and started reading aloud. "Welcome to the Board of Shadows. Warning, this game must not be played after midnight. Any attempt to ignore this rule will result in irreversible consequence. To start, each player must choose a piece and roll the dice." Emma stepped back, her gut telling her they should leave. But Caleb and Ethan were too excited to listen. "Irreversible consequences? What nonsense." Caleb laughed. "Let's play. It'll be fun." "But it's almost 11:30, Mia pointed out hesitantly. "Shouldn't we wait until tomorrow?" Ethan looked at his friends, a mischievous grin on his face, and said, "We're here now, aren't we? Let's play. It's just a silly superstition." Each of them chose a piece. Ethan took a knight, Mia chose a queen, Caleb picked a raven, and Emma, a ghost. They placed their pieces at the starting point and rolled the dice. To everyone's surprise, the pieces began to move on their own, as if guided by an invisible hand. "This is awesome," Caleb exclaimed. "How does it do that?" But the excitement quickly turned to fear when Ethan's piece landed on a dark red square. On the board, a card materialized, and Ethan picked it up, reading aloud, "The darkness approaches. Prepare for the first visitor." Instantly, their phone lights began to flicker, and the basement was plunged into total darkness. The air turned cold, and the sound of shuffling footsteps echoed off the walls. Primal fear gripped the teenagers. Did anyone else hear that?" Emma whispered, her heart pounding frantically. Before anyone could respond, a cold wind swept through the basement, and shadows began moving on the walls, dancing to a silent, macabre melody. "This isn't funny, Ethan," Mia said, trying to keep calm. "It wasn't me." Ethan replied, clearly scared. Suddenly, a larger, denser shadow emerged from the darkest corner of the basement. It seemed human, but faceless, without any clear form. It slowly advanced toward the group, and a deep, guttural whisper filled the air. "Leave now, for it's too late." The friends screamed in unison, backing up against the wall. Caleb, trying to appear brave, shouted back, "Who are you? What do you want?" But the shadow didn't answer. It just kept moving closer, and as it approached, the space around them seemed to grow colder, more oppressive. Then, with a sudden movement, the shadow dissolved into the air, leaving behind a deathly silence. "What the hell was that?" Mia exclaimed, her voice trembling. I don't know, but I think we shouldn't have started this game," Ethan said quietly. "We need to get out of here," Emma insisted, looking around frantically. But when they tried to climb back up to the first floor, they found the basement door was locked. No matter how hard they pushed or kicked, wouldn't budge. "We're trapped," Caleb whispered, panic rising in his voice. "Trapped in this damn game." Mia grabbed Ethan's arm, her hand shaking with fear. "We must keep playing. Maybe that's the only way out." Reluctantly, the others agreed. Each rolled the dice again, knowing that every move would bring something worse, something darker. And as the pieces moved across the board, the basement seemed to change around them. The walls closing in, the space distorting, as if the house itself were alive and hungry. As the friends continued playing, the atmosphere around them seemed to react to each move on the board. The air grew heavier, the darkness deepened, and whispers from the room's corners intensified. Ethan rolled the dice first. His knight piece moved a few spaces forward until it landed on a gray square with a bloody handprint. A new card appeared in the center of the board, and he picked it up with trembling fingers. Blood sacrifice must be made to continue. Pair for pain. The moment Ethan finished reading, a scream echoed through the basement. It was Mia. She looked down at her leg, where a deep cut had appeared out of nowhere, as if an invisible knife had just sliced through her flesh. Blood gushed, staining the stone floor. Caleb rushed to help, tearing a piece of his shirt to try and stop the bleeding. "Oh my God, Mia, what's happening?" Caleb shouted, panic in his voice. But Mia, though in shock, seemed oddly calm. Her eyes were fixed on the board, and she whispered, "It's the game. The game is doing this." Emma, trembling, picked up the dice. "We must keep going. If we stop now, we're doomed." She threw the dice with a sharp, almost angry motion. Peace, the ghost, moved to a square with a mask symbol. A new card appeared, floating towards her. The mask of fear reveals the true terror inside you. Suddenly, the room around them began to shift. The basement walls dissolved, and the group found themselves in a dark forest. Twisted trees surrounded them, their elongated shadows moving like serpents. In the distance, a hooded figure began walking slowly towards them, its eyes glowing red in the darkness. This isn't real," Emma whispered. But the feel of wet leaves beneath their feet and the smell of earth suggested otherwise. The hooded figure drew closer, each step the sound of branches snapping underfoot echoing like thunder. When it got within a few feet, it raised a skeletal hand and pointed directly at Caleb. He tried to move, but his feet seemed glued to the ground. Terror in his eyes was clear. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice breaking with fear. The figure didn't reply. With a sudden lunge, it advanced, and with a swift yank, Caleb was pulled off the ground, dragged through the forest as he screamed desperately for help. His cries grew fainter until they vanished altogether. When the forest faded away, they were back in the basement. Caleb was gone. It took Caleb," Mia said, her voice barely audible, tears streaming down her face. Ethan looked around frantically, searching for any sign of his friend. But there was nothing but the board, now glowing with a dark light. "We have to keep going," Emma said, more determined than ever. "If we stop, we all die." With heavy hearts, they prepared for the next turn, knowing the game would show no mercy. The three remaining friends were in shock. Ethan, trying to stay calm, rolled the dice again. His piece stopped on a square with the symbol of a smiling mask. Another card appeared, and he read, "The masks fall. The truth will be revealed." A mirror materialized in front of them. Mia approached, and when she investigated the reflection, she saw Caleb behind her, his eyes hollow, lifeless. She turned around, but he wasn't there. In the mirror, Caleb grinned unsettlingly, slowly raising his hand to point directly at Ethan. "No, this is impossible," Ethan said, backing away. Each shard of glass reflected something different. Personal nightmare, a twisted memory. Ethan saw his house on fire, his family screaming for help. Mia saw herself drowning, feeling water fill her lungs. Emma saw a dark hospital with endless corridors, where shadows of mutilated patients chased her. "We need to get rid of this," Ethan shouted, kicking the glass shards away. But the board continued to glow, demanding the game go on. Ethan was sweating, his hands shaking as he held the dice. He knew that any move could be their last. He looked at Mia, who was still in shock from what she saw in the mirror. "Mia, can you keep going?" he asked, trying to sound encouraging, though fear was evident in his voice. Mia took a deep breath and nodded. "We don't have a choice, do we?" He picked up the dice and rolled. Her piece, the queen, moved 3 spaces and landed on a black square with a symbol of a circle of eyes. The card that appeared was different from the others. It was black as coal, and the letters seemed written in a dark liquid. "The eyes of the abyss look upon you. Face your fears or succumb to them." Immediately, all the lights went out, and the group was plunged into total darkness. Ethan felt panic creeping into his mind as he heard low laughter around them. Quick and whispering, the laughter came from all directions, swirling around them like a whirlwind. "Emma? Mia, where are you?" Called out, but his voice sounded muffled. He was underwater. Then, suddenly, the darkness dissipated, revealing a new scene. They were now in an old but familiar living room. Mia let out a sharp scream when she recognized the place. This is my grandmother's house," she murmured, her voice filled with terror. Before they could react, a ghostly version of Mia's grandmother appeared at the door, her face twisted in an expression of rage and hatred. She moved toward Mia, raising a cane wrapped in black shadows. "You were always a disappointment," the figure shouted, and the cane came down, hitting the floor with a thunderous crack, reverberated through the room. Mia backed away, tears streaming down her face. "No, this isn't real. This isn't real." The room vanished as quickly as it had appeared, and they were back in the basement. The psychological impact remained. Mia was in a state of hysteria, her body shaking uncontrollably. Ethan approached, trying to calm her. "It's going to be okay, Mia. We need to be strong." But Ethan knew the game was feeding on their deepest fears, using their memories and traumas against them. What else could it bring to the surface? The air around them grew heavier, almost impossible to breathe. Emma, still pale with fear, rolled the dice. Her piece landed on a square with the symbol of an hourglass. Time around them began to warp. Invisible clocks began to tick, each second sounding like thunder. "What's happening?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with dread. The environment around them began to age rapidly. Basement walls started to decay, chunks of wood falling, mold spreading. Friends' bodies also began to age. Wrinkles appeared on their faces, their hair turned gray. Every passing second seemed to add decades to their lives. "We have to hurry," Ethan shouted, realizing time was against them. Emma rolled the dice with difficulty, her hands now trembling and arthritic. Her piece landed on a square marked with a fire symbol. The heat in the basement rose quickly. Flames began to appear on the walls, burning intensely without a clear source. "We're gonna die here," Mia shouted, now looking like an old woman, her voice raspy. Fire closed in, burning the board, but instead of being consumed, it seemed to feed on the flames, glowing even more intensely. This can't be the end," Ethan murmured, his voice failing. When all seemed lost, Mia managed one last effort, rolling the dice once more. Her piece landed in the center of the board, where a door symbol was revealed. "The exit," she whispered, her voice a mix of relief and terror. With the last move, a door appeared in the center of the basement. A massive wooden door, glowing with a bright light. Ethan and Emma, now almost unable to move due to the accelerated aging, crawled toward the door. "Hurry, before it's too late," Ethan said, each word a painful effort. Mia, using all the strength she had left, opened the door. Outside, there was nothing but darkness. But it was a darkness that seemed to promise freedom, a release from the torment they had faced. One by one, they crossed through the door. As they passed through the door, they expected to find the promised relief. However, what they found was a distorted version of the real world. They were back at the entrance of the Parker mansion, but everything around them seemed wrong. The moon in the sky was covered by dark clouds, and the wind that blew carried a smell of decay. Ethan, Emma, and Mia looked at their hands and faces, realizing that the aging had stopped. They were back to normal, but the fear lingered. "We made it," Emma whispered, incredulous. But as they turned to leave the mansion grounds, they noticed something terrible. The gate they had entered through was now locked, covered in rusty chains. The house, which had seemed to be crumbling before, was now immaculate, as if it had just been built, but in a way that shouldn't be possible. And then, like a whisper in the wind, the voice of the game echoed again. "The game never ends." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She looked around frantically, searching for an exit, but invisible walls began closing in around them, pushing them back toward the house. The mansion's doors opened on their own, as if inviting them back inside. Ethan, now feeling the weight of his decisions, turned to his friends. "No, we must fight. Can't go back in there." But the game had other plans. With a loud crash, the gate chains moved like snakes, wrapping around the friends and pulling them back into the mansion. The door slammed shut behind them with a final bang. They were trapped again, in the heart of the Parker mansion. And this time, they knew there would be no escape. No escape after midnight. The Board of Shadows would never end, and would continue to play with their minds and souls forever.